The sport of professional wrestling. I have been a fan since the rise of Hulkamania and still watch it to this day. I have been a fan of video games even longer, so when the two mega powers of video games and professional wrestling combined, it was a match made in heaven. We are not talking about WWF superstars, not even WWF WrestleFest. We are going to the year 1995 to discuss Midway's arcade hit, WWF Wrestlemania, the arcade game. What wrestler was supposed to be in the game but refused to show up to film his parts? What specific demands did The Undertaker make before he would commence filming? So take your vitamins and say your prayers, because this is the history of WrestleMania. The year is 1994 and Midway Games is riding high on the success of their recent arcade hits. Midway Games designer Mark Trammell had a huge hit with the arcade release Smash TV and became the creative director and project lead on sports titles such as NBA Jam. He wanted to create a one-on-one fighter but did not want to compete with Midway's other massive franchise, Mortal Kombat. He decided to switch over to the wild and wacky sport of professional wrestling. Initially, the game was going to be a straight-up version of wrestling, similar to WWF WrestleFest. He decided to take what he had learned from Mortal Kombat and apply it to this game. Thanks to a contact at Acclaim, he was put in contact with the WWF and soon thereafter a deal was struck. At the time, the WWF was going through growing pains, so their roster was not at its strongest. The top stars of the 80s, such as Hulk Hogan, had moved on to rival organization WCW. The roster was finalized for the game in mid-1994, which means by the time the game was released in 1995, Diesel was a world heavyweight champ and wasn't even in the game. The development team at Midway had also requested for the Steiner brothers to be included, but by this point they had left the company. The roster of wrestlers include Bret the Hitman Hart, The Undertaker, Yokozuna, Bam Bam Bigelow, Shawn Michaels, Doink the Clown, Razor Ramon, and Lex Luger. Mr. Perfect was also supposed to be in this game. According to Mr. Trammell, filming dates were finalized, plane tickets were bought, moves were blocked out, but he kept no-showing the project. No other explanation was given. They utilized the same blue screen digitizing technology that they had developed in their Mortal Kombat series, which really made the game stand out. Before filming would commence, The Undertaker demanded somebody get him a bottle of Jack Daniels. It took Yokozuna and Mr. Fuji almost an hour to walk from the front entrance all the way to the back of Midway's facilities where the motion capture sessions were being held. According to Mr. Trammell, Razor Ramon and Doink the Clown were a mess and were difficult to deal with during filming. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were absolute professionals and he had nothing but nice things to say about them. Adam Bomb was going to be a hidden character and even had all of his moves filmed. For whatever reason though, the character was scrapped. Since there was already a wrestling game by the name of WrestleMania, Midway decided to use the name but added the tagline, the arcade game. Each wrestler was at Midway headquarters for a total of 2 days to film their parts. To quote Mr. Trammell, 2 days of filming and 2 days of partying. Certain wrestlers were having trouble coming to grips with filming in front of a blue screen. Art director Sal DeVita was a lifelong wrestling fan and actually made the wrestlers work harder because he demonstrated their own moves for them. Because the wrestlers moved not just left and right as found in Mortal Kombat, but they also had to move up and down, so the developers had to buy a horse treadmill to get the movements just right. WrestleMania, the arcade game, was released in 1995 by Midway. This is essentially a one-on-one fighter with the standard combos and some wrestling moves thrown in to boot. The control layout is very similar to the Mortal Kombat series with low punch, high kick, low kick, and a block button right in the middle. Your character can also run by pressing low kick and low punch at the same time. The action in the game is overly exaggerated with giant cartoonish moves. Bam Bam Bigelow's fist would turn to flames. The Undertaker would pull out a tombstone and smash you over the head. Doink the Clown would pull a mallet out of thin air and use it on his opponent. Since this is essentially a midway fighting game, the character should bleed when hit. However, since this is the family-friendly WWF, the wrestlers don't bleed, but emit certain other objects. Yokozuna will drop hams when hit. Doink will drop bowling pins. Bret Hart will drop hearts, etc. There are hidden moves in the game that have to be discovered, similar to Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter II. Now, even though there are only 8 characters in the game, each wrestler has his own unique moveset. There are a wide variety of wrestling moves, including signature moves for each wrestler. Shawn Michaels has his super kick, Bam Bam Bigelow has his diving headbutt, and Yokozuna has his bonsai drop, among others. When you first start the game up, you will hear the announcer Howard Finkel as he welcomes you to WrestleMania.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Howard Finkel, and welcome to WrestleMania by Midway.
After selecting a wrestler, you have a choice of going for the Intercontinental Championship or go straight to the big time, the WWF World Heavyweight title. The Intercontinental title is a bit easier, but if you want the true ending for each wrestler, you have to win the WWF Heavyweight Championship. After selecting which mode you want to play, your wrestler will run along in a sort of mini ring entrance complete with a short snippet of their entrance music. Vince McMahon announces the upcoming combatants. You also get basic play-by-play commentary by Vince McMahon and Jerry the King Lawler. It is pretty funny to hear Vince McMahon yell "Boom Shakalaka" and "Rejected," which were taken straight from the arcade game NBA Jam.
Our capacity crowd here tonight. Boom shakalaka.
The playability feels a lot like Mortal Kombat in the beginning. There are some wrestling moves such as backdrops, body slams, hurricane ranas, and even top rope maneuvers. You will encounter one-on-one matches, 2-on-1 handicap matches, and even 3-on-1 handicap matches. Similar to the Mortal Kombat series, you can play head-to-head against another player. There is also a co-op mode which lets you and a friend attempt to become the World Tag Team Champions. There are a number of hidden modes as well, including Random Select, choosing a different color for your wrestler's attire, no blocking, etc. Apparently, Mr. Fuji was supposed to have a move in the game where he interferes on Yokozuna's behalf. There is a soundbite in the arcade ROMs with Jerry Lawler calling out Mr. Fuji's name. As it stands, the only appearance he makes in the game is him standing next to Yoko when you challenge him for a match. Now, it wouldn't be a midway fighting game without some type of fatality, right, Pat-Man? You are correct. There is only one fatality in the arcade game, and fittingly enough, it belongs to the Undertaker. If you perform the correct moves, a casket will rise in the center of the ring and you will push your opponent into it. The rumor has always been that the WWF got wind of this and told them no more fatalities. According to Mr. Turmel, however, he was anxious to move on to the as-of-yet untitled NFL Blitz series, so he decided to drop the rest of the fatalities himself. So the old rumor of the WWF having a problem with the fatalities can finally be put to rest. In peace. The graphics and animation were really well done, and it fit in nicely with the over-the-top production that the WWF was putting on at the time. Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler are actually sitting at ringside. Also sitting at ringside, front and center, is the lead designer Mark Trammell, head artist Sal DeVita, and Chicago DJ and longtime WWF fan Mancow. As I mentioned, the game was more of a one-on-one fighter than a traditional wrestling game. However, since it had been 4 long years since the last WWF arcade game, I took to this like a crackhead to a crack pipe. Sure, it wasn't a typical wrestling arcade game, I still found it very enjoyable and very addicting, just like a crack pipe. One other thing I want to mention are the personalized endings for each wrestler. They are very bizarre and actually a bit dark. For example, after winning the title, Doink goes back to the circus, but after getting too close to the fireworks, an elephant goes on a rampage and kills many of the audience. Razor Ramon takes the world title back to his home country of Cuba, where he is immediately mugged on the street by 3 guys. He ends up opening a pawn shop instead. YouTuber Wang did a pretty good analysis of each of the wrestlers' endings, so I will leave a link down below if you're curious. There were a number of conversions produced, and some of them turned out pretty good. Probe Software were in charge of the conversions, and the games were released by Acclaim. The home release was developed in conjunction with the arcade release, which was both a good and a bad thing. The good thing was that we received the home ports a lot quicker due to this. Approximately 6 months after the coin-op debuted, we were able to play it on our home systems. The bad thing was that the game was not finished when they started the conversions, meaning a lot of the secrets found in the arcade game were not included in the home release. No palette swaps, no random select, and no personalized endings. Also missing was the Undertaker's fatality. Apparently these were all late additions to the arcade game. As you can see from the picture, the graphics are all pretty similar across the formats, with the MS-DOS having the largest sprite size. By comparison, the size of the Genesis character makes him look like an action figure. The Genesis version is the first one we're looking at, and it's a pretty good conversion. The colors are washed out, and a lot of the graphical flair found in the arcade original is either scaled back or missing completely. The sprites are smaller as well. A lot of the sound samples are missing, and what is there is extremely garbled. Instead of digitized clips of the wrestler's music, we do get some nice chiptune renditions instead. The commentary is very limited, with Jerry Lawler nowhere to be found. The gameplay is fast though, when you do get 4 wrestlers on screen at once, just like the arcade game. Up next is the 32X version. Released at the end of the life cycle of the add-on, this is a big upgrade over the Genesis version. The resolution has been up to 320 by 240, but to accommodate for this, the frame rate has been dropped down to 30 instead of the standard 60 as found in all other versions. The extra resolution helps make everything appear a bit more cleaner, and the extra color boost sure looks nice. The sound effects and voices are a lot cleaner as well. You still get chip tunes for the wrestler's music, but the instruments used sound better. Once again, Jerry Lawler is MIA. The gameplay is really good though and feels like the arcade. The Super Nintendo version is up next, and it's not a very good conversion. Back in the day, I had a friend who worked at a certain video game magazine that had 3 initials for its name. About 2 months before the game was to be released on the home systems, he brought over a pre-release or beta copy of the game for the Super Nintendo. The first thing I noticed was there were only 6 players instead of 8. Bam Bam Bigelow and Yokozuna were both missing. I just assumed the characters were not completed yet since this was a pre-release. Boy was I wrong. The Super Nintendo could not handle the large sprite size of these 2 characters, so they just decided to drop them completely. Another thing that you will notice is there are only 3 wrestlers on screen at once instead of 4 as seen in every other version. Even with only 3 on screen at once, the speed tends to chug just a little bit at certain points. The graphics do look nice, and we do get more commentary here than we did in the 32X and Genesis versions. Not only do we get more from Vince McMahon, but we also get Jerry Lawler back on commentary. The music is decent and the sound effects are really good. The playability is nice and it feels like the arcade, just a little bit slower.
Next matchup, Bret Hart versus Doink the Clown. What's this? What's this? Rejected.
The PlayStation version is up next, and it's an excellent conversion, although not quite perfect. The graphics are very clean with large colorful sprites that are almost arcade perfect. The sound effects are good with commentary by Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler. Although even with the extra storage provided by the CD, some of the audio is still missing. For one thing, there is no music during matches and the wrestlers' entrance music are missing completely. The wrestlers have a lot of their signature grunts and groans, including some smack talk after certain bouts. We even get Howard Finkel's WrestleMania introduction, which is nowhere to be found in any other home version. Another odd thing I noticed is that the commentator's table is there, but it's empty. Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler are missing completely. There is also a 10 to 15 second loading time in between bouts. The gameplay is nice and tight and is on par with the arcade original.
Anything can happen here in the World Wrestling Federation. Listen to the crowd. That was close.
The Sega Saturn conversion is really well done and is one of my favorites to play. The graphics look similar in quality to the PlayStation version with large detailed sprites and smooth animation. In the sound effects department, this game is top shelf with one exception. Like the PlayStation version, there is no music during matches. We do get all of the wrestlers' entrance themes and they sound really good. We get full Red Book audio and even a 10-minute commentary track with all of the wacky things the commentators say. Very cool for that to be included. The speed of the game is just like the arcade game and the controls are nice and tight. We also have loading times similar to the PlayStation version.
I can't believe he pulled that off! A capacity crowd here tonight to the midsection.
And last but not least is the MS-DOS release. This features the largest character sprites for any home version of the game and they look great. The animation is nice and smooth with plenty of objects flying around the screen just like the arcade game. The sound effects are really good with all of the wrestlers' grunts and groans. The music is pretty good, although not quite as good as the arcade. The commentary is excellent with most of the samples from the arcade game transferred over. The speed of the game is on par with the arcade original and there is very little loading time. The controls are absolutely fantastic. This is an excellent conversion.
Who will be the victor at WrestleMania? To the face.
In 1996, WWF In Your House was released for PlayStation, Sega Saturn, and MS-DOS. This was essentially a sequel to WrestleMania that featured the same digitized effects as found in the arcade original. Midway Games had absolutely no involvement in this as it was developed completely by Sculptured Software. This is basically the first game with an updated roster and nowhere near as polished. This time around, the roster includes 10 WWF wrestlers including Bret Hart, The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels, Owen Hart, Goldust, Vader, The Ultimate Warrior, the British Bulldog, Ahmed Johnson, and Hunter Hearst Helmsley, otherwise known as Triple H. Vince McMahon returns on commentary, but instead of Jerry the King Lawler, he was replaced by Mr. Perfect. Jeff Jarrett was also supposed to be in the game and even had his parts filmed, but he left for rival organization WCW, so his character was scrapped. The wrestlers all have their own unique venues to wrestle in. For example, Owen Hart wrestles in a house of cards.
What speed?
Undertaker wrestles in a crypt.
The Ultimate Warrior! The Ultimate Warrior!
And Shawn Michaels wrestles in a nightclub.
Almost! What the?
Each wrestler also has their own fatality, giving further credence that the WWF had no issue with them in the first game.
See ya, and I wouldn't want
This game was released 24 years ago, and I must have had DDS back then. Deaf, dumb, and stupid. I thought this game was so good, I even wrote the FAQ that is still up on GameFAQs.com. Looking at it now, it's not very good. The graphics are a mixed bag, with some of it looking pretty good, while others are just a muddy mess. The animation is a bit too choppy as well. The sound is nice and clear, and there appears to be more commentary this time around. The controls are very stiff though, and are not as refined as the previous game. Try it at your own risk. And that takes us to the end of the history of WrestleMania, the arcade game. Although not a top seller for Midway, it was still a fairly big hit and is still a lot of fun to play, especially with your friends. It's not a straight up wrestling game, nor is it a straight up fighting game. In my opinion, this is the right mixture of both. Give it a go if you've never had the chance. You'll be glad you did. If you like this video and want to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. Also, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to my channel. It's the only way it can grow. Thank you so much for watching.